So tonight we're talking about camera. And one of the most important things about camera are the rules, first of all, which of course can always be broken. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what we call the stage line, or the 180-degree line. Okay, the idea with that is that if you think of a movie like an old play where you sat in the audience and you watched everybody on the stage. Everybody on the stage is looking, they're kind of on that side of the proscenium arch, and you're in the audience. So it's sort of a stage line. That's where that term comes from.
Fourth wall.
Yeah, the fourth wall. Right. Now, in film, we call it the 180-degree line because basically it's an imaginary line between two actors in a scene. And what you don't want to do is cross that imaginary line. So this is a looking down shot at two actors talking to each other. You can see their little noses there. So when you put the camera there, let's say you're going to do an over-the-shoulder shot, which if you don't know what that is, you'll learn later. So you're looking over the shoulder of one character to the other. So this character here on the image is looking right to left. And so when you move the camera to the other side, you want the other character to be looking left to right, because then they're looking at each other. All right, I'll show you more of this example. What you don't want to do, again, the rule is camera 3 jumps the stage line. That's what we call it, jumping the 180-degree line. Because what's going to happen now is that both two characters are going to be looking the same direction off screen. So it doesn't look like they're looking at each other anymore. It looks like they're looking, sort of gazing off in the distance together. Yeah.
For one example, there is this one scene in the Stagecoach when they're riding the river in the Stagecoach. There's also this shadow of a camera, which I know what you're really talking about. Is that there's a shadow of a guy and a camera shooting at this scene.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it carefully, you can see the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, here's an example from a film too. This is from can't remember, Scorsese movie. Forget which one. No. It's anyway. So the two actors are looking at each other. Okay, they're across the table from each other. So if you look, here's looking at De Niro. He's looking left to right. And Ray Liotta is looking right to left. They're looking at each other. So your camera is staying on the same side of the stage line. You're not jumping the stage line. Now, if the eyes are looking there, his eye is looking right to left, I'm just reiterating, then De Niro's looking left to right. The problem is that if you flop it, so now I've flopped these two shots, they don't look like they're looking at each other, they look like they're looking in the same direction off at something else. So that's the problem with jumping the stage line. It confuses the audience in not understanding what everybody's supposed to be looking at.
Even if we don't understand why, we know it's not right.
Exactly. It feels wrong. It feels wrong, and it's confusing. It's confusing to the audience. Okay, so again, like I said, imagine a line between the actors that you cannot cross. And the easy way to remember that is if one actor is looking right to left on screen, when you cut to the other actor, they should be looking left to right if they're looking at each other. All right? You'd be surprised how many times even the top directors get this wrong. It's like math for me. I mean, let me put it this way. It's like math would be for me. I don't understand math at all. I'm horrible at math. But, a mathematician or even just somebody who kind of knows math is like, well, that's totally easy. Why don't you understand that? Stage line to directors is very confusing many times. I don't understand why. It's a line. Just imagine a line connecting their noses, a piece of string, and just don't cross that line, and you're okay.
We used to call it the action axis.
That's another term for it, yes, and the action axis.
And it really makes sense. I mean, it's like you pointed out that it looks weird unless you realize, once you realize what's happening, then you know why you're doing it.
Yes. Yeah, the whole idea, you're establishing a geography, and we'll talk more about that through coverage later tonight, but when you enter a scene, you're establishing a geography where you kind of tell the audience, the door is on the right side, the table's on the left, the window's in the background, and the audience is expecting that geography. So now if you have two people talking to each other, and then you're jumping the stage line, you're confusing that geography, and it's disruptive to the audience. So you need to make sure that you don't disrupt them and take them out of the story. Of course, the famous thing is, unless you want to. So if you're trying to confuse them, you can't. Okay, like every rule, there's a way to break it legally. Okay, in this case, you can break the rule by, number one, moving the camera. Like, and I'll show you a video example here in a second to make it really clear. You can physically, without cutting it out, move the camera from one side to the other. As long as the audience is a participant in crossing the stage line, then their new geography is being established and they get it. They'll understand what's happening. The other one would be moving the actors, having the actors switch positions or move to another position. Again, we'll show examples. That helps the audience see you crossing the stage line. So that means you're not limited to just locking everybody into staring at each other. You can actually do things. So here, what was that last? Moving the focus of the actor. Yeah, so let me just show you this clip. It'll explain a little bit more. It's funny too.
That was not necessary.
Yes, but
What did you want to do?
I'm gonna break the 180.
Can't. It's impossible.
It's for class. This is son.
Back my head! You son of a bitch. Again! Stop it right now! What are you doing? You stop it right now, David! Stop it, David! You can't do this, David. It's crazy. No!
Cut away. Bitch.
What?
God damn it.
It's a little ridiculous. But you can see every time they wanted to cross the stage line, they used a technique to get there. Either moving the camera to the other side, having the actor shift position, or in the last one, using a cutaway. If you cut away, and then in this case, they cut on this side, they cut away to the girl. When they came back, they were on the other side of the people, and you saw her in the background. You're reestablishing the geography for the audience. So nobody's confused. It felt comfortable because it made sense. I should have actually done a version of this where I cut out those moves and just had us cut, and you'd be like, oh, what's going on? It'd be really disruptive. Yeah.
So that was kind of what I thought it was going to be. He's like, I'm going to break the 180 rule, and then he didn't actually break it.
But yeah, he legally broke it.
Right, legally broke it. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I that's weird to consider that still breaking.
Yeah, I think
It's actually a shift.
to take your point, breaking it would be doing it wrong.
I was
and-
just waiting for him to pop over the other guy's shoulder, looking at him the wrong
Exactly.
way.
Yeah. So that would have been breaking it for sure. What they were doing is reestablishing a new 180 degree.
Well, they were taking the 180 and, you know.
They were just moving it around. Yeah. So does that make sense, to everybody? Any questions?
Can you show the list of three again, please?
Sure. So moving the camera, you saw them move behind them twice. Moving the actors, where the one actor moved around to the other side, and then I did the other one that I don't have on here is a cutaway. But moving the focus of the actor on screen, you can change rack focus or shift. For example, if you're over the shoulder on me, looking at this person, and then I turn, and now you're on me, and I'm looking the other way or whatever. You've done it on camera, so it's legal. I mean, not legal, but it's acceptable because it doesn't confuse you as an audience. Make sense? Okay. We don't have to watch this again. All right. Okay, so let's talk about, this is my big thing. So as I said last week, the cinematographer, this is what I loved about being a cinematographer, you're the last person to see what goes on the film. By the way, you're all cinematographers if you shot anything before. You may not have $1 million worth of equipment, but you're still a cinematographer. You're still looking through the camera and making choices. So one important thing to remember is that cinematographer is the last person to see what goes on film. Nothing's going to change it after that. The image is as much a performer as the actors in front of the camera is. Remember we talked about that briefly. And just as every scene in a script has a purpose, and every prop and every element, every camera move and angle has a purpose. If you choose to shoot low angle looking up at somebody, it's making a statement. You may not think it has a purpose, but you are causing a visceral effect to the audience, whether you like it or not. So you have to consider all those things. Whether you're looking down at somebody, looking up at somebody, a wide angle versus a super close-up, they all mean different things and they tell different parts of a story. So make sure you consider all those things as you shoot. So let's talk about some of the basic shots in general. So these are kind of standard shots everybody's probably heard of. We'll show some examples in a second. the wide shot, the full shot, medium shot, and the close-up. Okay, so wide shot or establishing shot, you might call it, does exactly what an establishing shot might sound like. It establishes the geography. We talked about geography in the 180-degree line. We're setting up the world for the audience so they kind of understand where the scene is going to take place. So if you don't want the audience to know, you may not start with an establishing shot. You may start with a close-up and make it more, make it about the person and let the audience discover the location through the scene. Depends what's important to the story at the time. But basically, a wide shot establishes the environment. A full shot is really a full body shot. In this case, there's a 2-shot there. This would be a standard medium shot, sort of about stomach up, okay? And a close-up from a different scene. Often close-ups cut off the top of the head just a little bit. And always keep the chin in. Don't have the chin rest on the bottom of the frame. We'll show some examples of that. Some other variations of shots. A medium cowboy shot was actually a medium shot that cuts at the thighs. And they called it a cowboy shot because it kept the guns in. So for Westerns. The medium close-up would just be something a little bit tighter than a standard close-up. Extreme close-up. Over-the-shoulder shots, we'll talk about those in a second. So these are kind of a medium cowboy here where you're cutting them at the thighs. This would be a good extreme close-up, or ECU as we call it. Difference between an extreme close-up or just a close-up and an insert is that a close-up is usually of a person or a character. An insert is usually an object, quite frequently what the character is looking at. So if you cut away to a book that they're reading, that's more of an insert. It's not a close-up of the book, it's an insert of the book. Versus if you cut to the person's eyes as they're reading, that's a close-up, or in this case, extreme close-up of the person. Just the difference. One of the most confusing sometimes and difficult types of shots, but used most frequently, is an over-the-shoulder shot. Or OTS, we call it. So in this case, over the shoulder is obviously, as you might imagine, over the shoulder looking at the other character. So you see a piece of the foreground person, but you're focused on the person behind them. The key is how much of this person do you put in frame. Some people you'll see a ton of the people in front. Sometimes you'll see even less than this. The key is you need to have enough so that you know that there's a person there, but not so much that they're overwhelming the frame, because the focus should be on this person back here. So that's kind of, you see here. But remember, actors move, so I'm going to show you the reverse shot. So in this case, the actor had moved over a little bit, shifted his weight, and so he's a little bit more in the shot. But our focus is still on the background person. You have to let it breathe naturally. But the important thing is that size-wise, they're matching. So you can see that, his positioning, maybe just slightly tighter on her, but not too bad. But the size of her and the size of him back there are pretty much identical. Because you don't want there to be jump cutting. If you have 2 over-the-shoulder shots and one is tighter than the other, when you're cutting back and forth, it's going to jump. You want them to be the same size so that your eyes and the audience isn't being distracted by the edit. You want the edit to disappear, and you want them to fall into the action and the story.
Can I ask you a question about
Yep.
close-ups? One of the things I've noticed since we've gone up in television size is that, close-ups, I can see people's pores. I don't find that it's filming, that's my opinion, but it almost makes me want in my filming to not get that tight into someone, because I don't know, to me it's distracting to have someone gigantic on your screen, on your TV at home, when it doesn't really give the feel of the close-up, it just makes them feel really raw.
Yeah, when high definition TV came out, or photography came out, there was a big problem with makeup, believe it or not, because when we had an extreme close-up in CinemaScope, giant screen in a theater, you're shooting on film, and so the film has a certain level of degradation, some grain and some motion, and you don't see that detail. But then they went to high def and now Ultra HD, which is 4K. It's too crisp and too sharp, and you see too much. And they've started actually training makeup artists to know how to get rid of some of that detail to make it better. But it is a problem, and it's something you need to consider how to tell your story. If you feel it's distracting to your story, then yeah, maybe you don't want to be so close. Or you may want to soften your image slightly when you post it or something. There's options like that. But
I'm just wondering, how how do you give a feel of a close-up without making someone seem larger than life, you know?
Well, that's kind of the point of a close-up.
Well, I mean, zooming in on the eyes makes me draw focus to the attention of what he's looking. I mean, I guess in a way it does make it's obviously it makes his eyes bigger, but it doesn't make his head look.
Right.
I don't know. It's funny how the feel is different.
It is definitely different, yeah. And it's a careful choice you have to make. If this close-up is wrong, feels wrong because you're seeing a giant head, you know, do you want to be in here, you know, or do you want to back? Do you want to say this is my close-up? I'm not going to go any tighter than that. So.
And I don't know that I notice it as much in movies as I do on the news.
Yeah. Well, and that's
That's
yeah, and that's HD usually at 30 frames per second, maybe 24, but too sharp, too crisp an image. So.
I think it's also the context of what they're shooting, because I'm thinking in terms of, for example, Star Trek, they're trying to convey this tense situation, so they have this tight shot on the face, not even the mouth, with the lighting on the eye.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you know that something's happening.
Yeah.
caught in the moment, and I suppose maybe if I think about when I find it the most annoying, when I'm watching.
And if you're finding it annoying, then other people might too. So you have to kind of find a way to make it work for you. Yeah. Okay. So a few other shots, which I won't show you examples of. POV is a point of view. It's a point of view of a person. Okay. An insert we talked about a little bit. And just in case you want to know, a martini shot is the last shot of the day. So if you're on set and somebody says
Martini, but the actual.
it's the actual last shot of the day. If somebody says, "Is this our martini shot?" then if it's the last shot you're going to shoot, then that's what it is. So I could have put in a Mickey Rooney, but I only work for a few of us. That's a short little creep. So, they literally reuse that. So let's talk a little bit about coverage. Okay, that what we just described in all those shots, the wide shot, the medium shot, the close-up, that's all considered coverage, covering the scene. And the most important thing about it, coverage, and we talked about this a little bit with the over-the-shoulder, is how we wanted things to match up in size so they didn't jump in editorial. What you really want to do when you shoot, whether it be an over-the-shoulder or a close-up of one character, you want to make sure that you match the angle, which includes using the same lens, the same camera height, or at least a complementary camera height, so that they don't jump. So, for example, this is one of your worst nightmares as a cinematographer. Okay, we decided to shoot a scene in this corner, and it has to be in this corner over here. All right, so I put one character there, and I put one character here, and I'm like, ooh, this would be really cool. I'm going to shoot with a really long lens. So when I shoot that character, I'm going to get way back here and zoom in and get this really awesome shot of that person. Okay, well, when I go to the reverse, there's a wall there. Yeah, you have to think ahead. You have to plan your coverage before you shoot it and where you set up your scene. Otherwise, you'll find problems like that, and it will not edit as well. A long lens shot, even if the person's the same size, cut with a wide angle shot of the person the same size will look entirely different. We talked about depth of field last week, field of view and things like that was all different. So you have to make sure you pay attention to that matching angles, even measuring the height of the camera from one angle to make sure that on the other side you get the same height, marking down that your zoom lens was set to a 40 millimeter or whatever, and get the same on the other side. It's really important to get that kind of coverage. And then we talk about building in and building out. Every scene, well, not every scene, most scenes, a lot of scenes, how do I say this, start with a wide shot, then they go to a single, and then they go to a single, and then an over the shoulder, and then over the shoulder, and then maybe a two shot, and then back out to the wide shot. So what you're doing is you're planning your whole scene to carry through. You build into the scene, into the tension of the scene, and then you have a way out of that scene. So your way out may be cutting from a super close-up out, but just plan it. Make sure you're planned for it. And along those same lines, when you shoot these shots, even though you only think you're going to use this shot for when they walk into frame, shoot the whole scene until it just falls apart and doesn't work anymore from this angle. Get every angle all the way through as much as possible, because then you have material to edit. Don't make your choices, I think I said this last week, don't make your choices in camera if you don't have to. Make them later in editorial when you can mess around with it. So the important thing is start with the wide shot, get an establishing if it works for you. Get in over the shoulders for the whole scene. Get close-ups for the whole scene. Let the action happen, and then you have something to edit together. Does that make sense? So another important element to talk about with shooting is the blocking. of the scene. It's really important that when you start off a scene of any kind, that even if it's just you, you walk through that scene. What we do professionally is that we will, like let's say it's the mornings or 8 a.m., we all walk on set, everybody's there. We do a walkthrough. So what we do is the actors come out, the director and the cinematographer who've probably spoken about stuff get together and they say, okay, we're going to start with the wide shot here, and they're going to walk in and we're going to truck back here, and then we're going to do over here, and then they're going to walk over there. You basically work through the scene roughly without the camera or anything like that. So everybody kind of understands you're on the same page. You understand what's happening in the shot, in the scene, and you're ready for it. So that's blocking it out and making sure that everything is organized. Again, it comes down to if the person's walking from here to there, they need to, in every shot, walk from here to there at the same time. Well, if you don't plan that out, it's going to get very confusing, and you're going to find yourself running in different lanes and then having to reshoot it. So that's exactly, you were on your own, and if you had somebody watching through the camera, they might have said that from the beginning. You might have, because the person may not have known what's in your head, you might have ran through it a little bit, blocked it a little bit to say this, and you caught that error earlier. But that's just the nature of being alone. Of course, you had nobody to see that for you. So it's very nice to be able to make those plans ahead of time rather than find yourself kind of caught in the corner having to reshoot something at the end or cut it out, which is worse. So,
But I found things didn't work. I started out with an idea.
Yeah.
I filmed it, and it didn't work, so I had to plan something different.
yeah, exactly. My whole junior thesis film at USC was me shooting one film and then the car breaking down. I was about this car, and I literally, like 2 nights before, scrapped that entire film, took some of the footage and created a whole new story and shot it like in one night, all night. And I actually got a C because I didn't tell them I changed the story. So he said the film was really good, but you're supposed to do the story you told us you were going to do. And I couldn't do the story, so it happens. So I already mentioned walkthrough, so walking through with the actors, making sure you understand where everything is going to be. And then that blocking, as I again talked about with walking across, making sure you have continuity. Continuity just means that everything's happening the same way every time you shoot that shot or that scene. So you want to make sure the actors pick up the pen with the same hand. You want to make sure they turn at the same moment. Get these things together so that when you cut alternate shots together, the action's occurring the same way. And then it's easier to cut together and makes more sense. You don't want them freelancing too much. So all the stills I've been showing are from Almost Famous, one of my favorite movies. Cameron Crowe, great writer. So I thought I'd show you the scene, and you can see how they start off with a steady cam and then go to that establishing shot and through the coverage. The one thing I want to point out about this scene too, which is something you should always remember when you're working with actors, if you can, roll the camera longer. Don't cut right away. Sometimes you want to let that actor breathe a little bit and let them have opportunity. You'll see at the end of this scene, Kate Hudson has this moment. I don't even know whether it was planned or not, but Cameron Crowe, even after her last line, just let it roll. And there's a moment where you can kind of see her go through some emotional change. It's really wonderful in that little snippet without cutting early. Other directors might have just cut it after her last line, but it's nice to see what can be done. So here you go. One more back.
I can read you. I know it.
Bad quality, so.
What's that?
What's that?
You're worried.
You're worried about me?
Yeah, I
gotta work on that.
You're so sweet.
So sweet.
God, if there was
more of you and him.
Don't tell me this
stuff.
I want to
I
like
wanna
him.
like him.
Do you miss Jess
You
or
just
something?
or something?
You have
You
no
have
idea.
no idea.
No, I'm not.
No, I'm not
On the plane.
on the plane.
I'm not going
I'm
on
not
some
going
other
on
band's
some other
bus.
band's
I could
bus.
go
I
with
could go with the Stillwater Road group, but that would be
pathetic. And
pathetic.
the girls are all
And the girls are all
going
going
to
with
pie.
pie.
So if you
So
could
if you could
find
find
out
out
from Russell.
Penny.
Forget it.
Forget it. I'm flying to New York myself. I've got a bunch
partial
of partial tickets.
I know his
ex-wife,
ex-girlfriend
current girlfriend.
thing is
I'm
saying,
not sure
I'm
that's
not
a
sure
good
that's a
idea.
good idea.
What are you saying?
What are you saying? What are you talking
Did
about?
Russell
Did
say
Russell say something?
No.
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 I don't know
I don't remember
Well, I know
Well,
he
I know
wants
he
me.
wants me there.
Wake
Wake up!
Don't go
Don't
to New
go
York.
to New York.
Why are you yelling?
Why are you yelling at me?
I thought
I thought we were going to Morocco.
There is no
There is
Morocco.
no Morocco. There's never been a Morocco.
There's not
There's
even
not
a
even a
Penny Lane.
Penny Lane.
I don't even
I
know
don't even know your
name.
real name.
If I ever met a man to be able to look at me, but you just look at me.
When and where does this real world occur?
I mean,
I
am
really confused here.
All these
rules and all these sayings and nicknames.
You're too sweet
for rock and roll.
Sweet?
Sweet?
Where do you
get off?
Where do you
get sweet? I'm dark and mysterious and pissed off,
and I could be very dangerous to
all of you.
I am
not
sweet. And you should know that
about me.
I
am the enemy.
Look,
You should be happy for me. You don't know what he says to me in private.
Maybe it is love. As much as it can be for
I
somebody.
sold you the humble pie for $50 and a case of beer.
I was there.
I was there.
I was
there.
I'm sorry.
What kind of
beer?
Yeah, I just held that extra length of time there on the end. Let her go. Let her perform. It was really nice. So, any questions so far? See how they moved around like crazy? That was all the blocking. You planned that out ahead of time, so they were all moving into other over the shoulders and singles, and it was really neat. So,
How many times do you think they had to run that?
They probably shot it with 3 cameras, so they probably had the establishing shot, the wide shot, and then they probably couldn't get the over the shoulder because it wasn't that long of a lens. So they probably ran the wide shot and then got in for coverage and shot both over the shoulders at the same time, and then both singles at the same time. So 2 or 3 cameras. Yeah, that's handy when you can shoot with multiple cameras. But all you have to do is block them out, and you can shoot it with 1 camera.
So when they're shooting with the multiple cameras, is there times when they use where that camera is as a piece of direction?
How do you mean?
Like for the actors, do they know where that spot's gonna? They know where that spot's established, but can they use that as a point for when they're moving, or the movement's just crazy because they're actors?
No, they worked all that out ahead of time. So what you do is you put you take a piece of tape, like a cloth tape, and you make a T out of it, and and that's your mark. And so basically everybody has marks, and they might have multiple marks. And so it's amazing, really amazing actors. They'll have the mark there. Sometimes they don't even need the mark, and they'll hit it exactly every time. But they don't look down. They know exactly where to go, and they'll hit that mark exactly every time. A really good actor. So, but you work it out. You put marks on the ground, and you let them know where they need to be. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they miss it, and they block the entire lens. And but that's just. And once you get it all blocked out, and you've run it a couple times, so what you do is you'll do a blocking rehearsal where you just no camera, whatever. And then you would do the lighting and kind of get the first shot set up, and then maybe you'll do more of a camera rehearsal if there's moves in it like that to work out where everybody's going to be and make sure you got it lined up and works out right. But you don't want to spend too much time doing all that stuff because you got to actually start shooting at some point. Right? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about framing. One of the worst things is being handed a camera, even a still camera, and being told to take family pictures. Especially now, everybody thinks I know every camera in the world because I went to film school, when I don't know those kind of cameras. But you see this so frequently in family portraits. Does anybody see anything wrong with this picture?
Not everybody's looking at the camera.
Well, not only that. What else? Yep. Way too much headroom. Just my teaching assistant blurted that out. So. It may not seem odd to you, but it is an uncomfortable framing, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So framing, you don't want to have excessive amount of headroom because it looks wrong. Now again, all these rules can be broken if this is the point you're making, but you need to know why it's wrong traditionally so that you can break the rule later. Too little headroom is also wrong, where you have the top of the head just ever so slightly touching that top of the frame. It's just uncomfortable to have that, and the eyes are too high in frame. Something more traditional, good composition like this, just enough headroom so it doesn't feel like they're being hit by the top of the frame, puts their eyes 2/3 of the way up the frame. That's a little bit more comfortable. Now all this comes from a thing called the rule of thirds. Okay, basically you take an image, any image, and you break it up into 9 quadrants. You use 2 vertical lines, 2 horizontal lines, equally spaced. What you want to try to do is put areas of interest, we'll call them, on these lines, because it's a comfortable way of framing it. It's comfortable to us. I can't probably write any sort of formula that would explain this, but we will all agree that it is comfortable. So this is an example of a frame broken up into thirds, into the rule of thirds. In this case, it's an over-the-shoulder shot. Okay, so we put the actor on this in this third, and we're throwing, by following his lead, both the focus and the fact that he's looking there, to the distance, and they're in that quadrant. So it's just separating that feeling, and that's kind of how they're framing this. But more specifically, you can see here on the left side, just a standard shot, everything's framed up even, not as attractive as when you use the rule of thirds and you put the sun over on the other line. You're allowing more space around for you to look at the view, so to speak. When looking at a person, let's say just a profile picture here. Put him in the middle of the frame, okay, it's okay. Put him to the left of frame so you give him what we call nose room, which I'll talk about more in a second, or place for him to look. So distance, frame space for him to look feels more comfortable. Similarly, tree in the center, a tree offset, more comfortable. These are pretty obvious examples. I don't know, because these all look good to you. And same thing with the headroom situation. Putting the eyes right in the center of frame with so much headroom isn't as good looking as putting the eyes on the upper line and giving just a little bit of headroom. Does that look, do you guys get that? Does it kind of feel right, the difference between two? Anybody not get it? So what?
Was this all kind of figured out over years and years of filming? That
Yes.
this looks way better this way.
Just photography in general, yeah. Just
Painting,
that.
actually.
What's that?
Painting.
Yeah, painting first, exactly, yeah.
Exactly, we are the
Yeah.
Renaissance.
It's just balancing the frame is what they call it, balancing the frame and the image to look more pleasing to us. Yeah, so it's just years of experience. So we talked about that nose room a little bit. They call it balancing the frame. So in this case, with the little balance thing you can see, you put them in the middle of the frame and it feels weighted to the right or to the left from your perspective. But you give them nose room and it balances out the feeling of that image. And the reason you do that is because you want to provide your actor or actress a place to look. Now, if they're in profile like this one, you give them more space on the left than if they're looking a little bit more at you. So if they're looking closer to camera, the closer they are looking to camera, the less nose room you need to give them, the more centered up you can put them. But remember, you always kind of keep them on one side or the other because you're on one side of that stage line or that 180-degree line. So even if she's looking right next to camera, you're still on the side, in this case, her left side or camera right side of the action. So there's always a little bit of shift. She's never centered perfectly. So if you look at this frame where we put her higher in frame. So her eyes are in the upper quadrant, they're not on the line. You're forcing her up a little bit. It feels too high, like we're about to cut her eyes off. And comparably, if we lower her down, we're cutting her chin off. That's also very uncomfortable. Let me put the lines up there. So we're cutting the chins off, we're putting her eyes in the center of frame. It feels unbalanced, too much forehead. It feels uncomfortable, okay? So, again, this is now centering her too much, and we're now not sort of making a choice. Artistically, we're sort of neutral. Put her in the center of frame. Eyes are on the upper line, but she's right in the middle. It doesn't feel as comfortable. So we go back to the original frame where she feels a little bit more comfortable looking off the side of frame. And we can see the nose room that we've given her to look off to the frame. The further off, as I said, so he's looking a little further off the frame. It's not the same scene. So he has a little bit more room. He's not looking quite as close to camera, so now we've given him a little bit more room. And like that drawing we had in a complete profile, we maybe put the actor way on the right side of the screen to give him a lot more room. So the closer to the camera, the less nose room you need to give them. The further into profile they are, the more you need to give them. And again, these are rules to know and to break if they apply. putting an actor so that their face is right here looking off this way, right at the edge of frame, is going to make the audience feel very uncomfortable. They're going to feel pressed against the side of frame. You're going to want to know what they're looking at because we're not given enough room to see anything of what they're looking towards. And if that works for the film, that's what you need to use it for. So break the rules as they work for your story. But you need to know the rule before you can break it. Okay? So we're going to watch this little video here. It kind of goes through all this again, but in a nice visual way. I like visuals.
This week we're talking about cinematography and going through lots of examples of how different camera techniques will have different effects on the audience. Hello, my name is Simon Cage and this is DSLR Guide. So this is the first part in a series all about cinematography, where we'll be looking at using the camera and lighting to tell stories. So in this first part, we're focusing on where to place the camera and how to set up the layout of your scene so that we can get a certain reaction from the audience. So the first thing to think about is depth. Now, I think that this is one of the biggest differences between amateur filmmaking and the movies that we see at the cinema. So what I mean by depth is when the images look three-dimensional, when there's a big difference between the foreground elements, the midground, and the background. And this can usually be achieved by looking out for perspective lines going off into the distance. Or another thing you can do is have a frame in the foreground, something which provides a natural frame. This can really help to add some real depth, and it makes the shots a lot richer and more pleasing to the eye. If you look at any painting or photo or any shot from a film, they often have really nice depth in them, which makes a really rich frame. Now you may choose to avoid depth and have very flat images, perhaps if you want the audience to feel lonely or detached, or for a character who feels trapped and like they haven't got any space to move around, or maybe if they're in a really boring lifestyle, you would also use flat images. But because we see really rich shots with lots of depth, every time we go to the cinema, the audience has an expectation that the shots will have depth. So if you accidentally shoot the whole film really flat, then that might leave a very different impression on the audience to what you're going for. Now, I believe it was Alfred Hitchcock who said that the size of something within the frame is directly reflecting how important it is to the film. So, if we look at this example from The King's Speech, then the main character is very apprehensive about doing public speaking. So notice how the microphone is huge and it's kind of covering up his face at times, and it shows how this microphone is really important to him, and it was really overwhelming for him to have to do this public speaking. Now, this is also commonly used to show the relationship between characters. In this famous scene from Citizen Kane, the main character is very far away, dwarfed by the other two characters, but as he takes control of the situation, he walks close to the camera and then he towers above them. So notice how this wasn't random, they actually used the size of characters to change just as the story changes, just as the characters change. Now the next thing is contrast. Our eyes are naturally drawn to high contrast parts of an image, so if you put your main character behind something that's very low contrast and doesn't make them stand out, then it can often be hard for the audience to even see where they are. Now the other thing to note is whether there's something really high contrast which could actually be distracting the audience's eyes from where they should be looking, in this case maybe at the main character. So once you understand contrast, you can decide whether you want your characters to really stand out or whether you do want them to blend into the background a bit. So if you have a really shy character, for example, low contrast might be a great way to go. So in general though, you don't want the audience to have to search around and look for them. The kind of standard is to have high contrast so that they can see what's going on. And it's worth noting that contrast isn't just about dark and bright things. In this image, the circle stands out because it's brighter, but in this one, the most colourful part of the frame is where our eyes tend to hang around. Whereas this circle stands out because it's contrasting with the other circles, but this time in size. And the same rule applies for shape. A good cinematographer uses all kinds of contrast in order to show and hide certain things from the audience. But what about the different types of shots? Well, the traditional way to enter a scene would be to have an establishing wide shot, which shows the audience exactly where everything is, and the setting, as well as giving some hints about the time of day. But what if you decided to be unconventional and just throw the audience straight in with a close-up, so they don't really know what's going on, maybe they feel a bit disorientated, but that could work very well for your scene, depending on what kind of vibe you're going for. On a more practical level, wide shots can be important to show body language, or props, or maybe even costume. So let's say you have someone walking down the street and they're really frustrated, so they keep kicking this can. Well, if you'd shot that in extreme close-ups, then you might not have been able to see the can at all. So we would have lost that emotional cue for frustration. And speaking of close-ups, they give the audience the opportunity to be most personal and intimate with the characters. And when used sparingly, they're often more powerful. Just like in music, you have moments of quiet, which then will make the loud parts seem even more powerful. So I think the good principle for all of this is to go back to the Citizen Kane shot, because I think that cinematography is most effective when there are changes that then reflect the story, maybe the characters making a decision, or the story going in a new direction. So next up is a whole bunch of techniques all condensed into what I'd call balance. So this is just following the general guides of framing. So by this I mean using the rule of thirds to place our subjects somewhere in the frame that looks very natural. It's keeping heads in the frame. Here's a before and after. It's also worth keeping the camera on a level horizon. Again, another before and after. And it's also framing to give your characters looking room, where they have space on the side of the frame where they are facing. So most of the time we're pretty much aiming for shots that are as balanced as possible. I'd say that 95% of shots from Hollywood films are pretty much well balanced, and if you accidentally set your camera to be off balance, whether that's through the horizon being a bit off or not giving your actors enough headroom or looking room, then it can really have a bad effect on the vibe that you're going for. But of course you could purposefully make your shots unbalanced. Maybe if your character is going off the rails, or if they're just really unpredictable, then that could be a really useful storytelling device. But in general, I'd recommend being pretty subtle about this most of the time, because it really can be distracting from the story if you push it too far. So how far away from each other you position characters can say a lot about their relationship. So let's say you have a shot of a kid who's feeling really left out, well, you might actually make some distance between them and the other people to show that emotional distance. And of course you can flip this by having characters close together, which suggests trust and intimacy. And in a great blog post by Shane Halburn, he talks about how in his film Crazy Beautiful he used over-the-shoulder shots with plenty of distance to begin with, but then as their relationship deepened, the gap between them closed. And finally, let's talk about the height of the camera. Now if you set it up at eye level, then you're giving a pretty neutral impression to the audience, but then think of the phrases they really look up to them compared to, oh yeah, they really look down on them. They have very big connotations. Looking up to someone makes them sound quite heroic, while looking down on someone makes them sound quite vulnerable. So in films they often use this as a very simple way to establish who has the dominance in a scene. Now I would like to add that just because, let's say you had a character who was feeling overwhelmed, that doesn't mean that you have to shoot them from a high angle and set it to be off balance and give them no looking room and use every single one of the features. It's kind of a case of picking and choosing which ones you think will work best for the story. But it is worth remembering that all of the techniques I've talked about in this video are completely up for interpretation. When it comes to adding the music and the dialogue and the kind of backstory, any of these features could be used to kind of convey a completely different emotion. So there's no way that these are rules, they're just kind of guidelines, and you kind of look at the way that some filmmakers have done it and then decide which parts you want to take and which parts you want to leave. So my advice is just to watch lots of films and to be really intentional with your cinematography choices, and it's always based on what the story is and what the vibe of your scene is, and what the characters are like. So that's pretty much it for this week. I would like to say that on the blog post I'll link to a whole bunch of videos which have taught me loads about composition and all the stuff that we've been talking about in this video, so do check that out if you're interested. Link in the description. But that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time.
So that's kind of cool. Does everything make sense?
Yeah, I like the coffee he does.
You like what?
The kind of coffee he drinks.
Oh, okay. I just thought if I played a video that said pretty much everything I had just said, but with an English accent, you'd listen. He does speak with his hands a lot.
Yes.
So see, we're very much alike. It's like a brother of mine. Okay, the next video I'm going to show, I'm going to actually talk over, because I actually cut out the guy who was in it because he was so boring and dry that I'm like, this is horrible. What he's trying to say is good, but he's horrible. So we're just going to go for it. We're going to talk about camera motion a little bit now. We're going to start getting into moving the camera. So some of the basics of moving the camera, for example, in this case, panning the camera, which is rotating the camera on your axis. Okay, this will sound rudimentary, but it gets more complex. Tilting is tilting it up and down vertically. Okay, they serve purposes, easy purposes, from panning the camera, from revealing elements by panning off onto something. Here's an example from Braveheart, I think, where it's just simple pan that rotates with the character to reveal other actors or a key element coming toward them. So simple pans are very effective to reveal information when you need to. Dolly moves, that is called a truck in, okay? So you're moving in, a dollying in is moving in and out, and this is an example of is a really subtle example of dollying into somebody to increase the tension or dollying out to decrease it. A truck is side to side. So dolly is in and out, truck is side to side, and obviously it gives a real great element. It allows great transitions moving with the actors. This is a great wide shot. Here's another one. This is probably more Steadicam-like or something. But you're moving with the actors. You get to experience the world with them rather than having them solid and static. So this is a good reason for moving the camera. You need to move it with some sort of tool. So in this case, he's using different kinds of elements of dollying, but you can use basic stuff like wheelchairs or skateboards. These are skateboard wheels made into a dolly. So there's some very simple solutions to making something that'll move the camera smoothly for you. Of course, you can go more complex into something like a Steadicam. This is actually a variation of Steadicam. So much like what we were talking about in terms of the weighted pole, in this case it's actually connected to a harness of the body. So it allows the body to support the weight more and it floats more. If you ever saw Aliens, ever see Aliens, the movie Aliens? Okay, remember the guns, the big long guns that the guy and the girl had? That was a Steadicam connected to a gun. So Jim Cameron just took apart a Steadicam. But you can see the great things you can do with it. You can move a lot around. So if you have this system. And by the way, before we get onto that, if you're trying to do a Steadicam and you want to do it low, or like the pole thing, you can just put the weight on the top and the camera at the bottom. So don't think you're always limited to that. So boom shots are great too. My first feature, we actually built a crane, believe it or not. But they are great for pulling in and out of scenes, to getting great establishing shots with the actors if you can figure out a way to pull off a crane. Some of these are just simple jib arms. This is one that is built for that, but it's just a fulcrum with a weight on one end and your camera on the other. Now, of course, aiming it might be difficult, and they have complex tools to do that, but if you can set it up in a way that maybe it's just a super wide shot, your camera's on really wide, and you just take a board, put a bolt through the middle of it, right in the middle, put some weight on one end, put your camera on the other end, it'll do a crane. So there's different ways to work that out. So some of the more complex tools, these are like some of the dollies. The Fisher 10 dolly right there, awesome dolly, has a hydraulic up and down, pneumatic I should say, not hydraulic, pneumatic up and down, so it uses air, so it's really smooth and quiet. This is a Pee-wee dolly, much smaller. This is a short film I directed, and we needed a small thing because we were working in a convenience store. But again, you can use almost anything to do a dolly move. And I always think one of the things that sets many films apart is the ability to move the camera. That if you get stuck into unless it just serves the story absolutely, being able to move the camera from now and again makes or breaks a film sometimes in giving that quality of real professionalism. So think about that. If it fits within your film, to try to find ways to move the camera, even if it's just for the establishing shot, like that one Batman shot where they were just moving across so you get a feeling in motion. Now we talked about Steadicam. This is a little bit more traditional Steadicam. Again, big weight at the bottom. With the Steadicam setup, there's actually a monitor. That's what he's looking down at. On the other side of here, there's actually a monitor right here. So they're actually operating by looking at the monitor and moving around like that. So that's what a Steadicam. So we're going to see this little video. I thought it'd be fun. What's that?
How often do they trip?
Hopefully not many times because they hurt their back pretty bad. So you usually have an assistant camera person who's watching where they're going and stuff. Whenever I did anything handheld, I always had somebody who would hold on to my belt or the back of me, and like if I'm walking backwards, because I don't know where I'm going, and you veer off and you never know what happens. But This is an interesting video from the guy who actually invented the Steadicam, Garrett Brown.
I'm Garrett Brown. I'm an inventor, I guess. I decided because I had a camera that I loved, an 8mm wind-up Bolex that somebody had loaned me, and I got fascinated with it. I decided that I should get in the movie business. I was never a fabulous cinematographer. I was not that interested in lighting or that good at it, but I did love the shooting, the moving the camera, the shot blocking, you know, that aspect of it. And the combination of loving to move the camera and having such limited and idiotic ways of doing it sent me after something that didn't exist. Steadicam got me into movies. I never shot on a feature film set until the first time that I trotted out the Steadicam prototype in Stockton, California, 1975. Now really, you can't be pouncing around handheld on a film without Steadicam. It just will not do. Keystone Cops and Max Sennett stuff, you know, because they love to sling a camera on some of a fire truck and carry around. You know. One of the people actually who I do immensely admire was Abel Gance, who shot Napoleon. And he was way ahead of his time. He had cameras on, you know, on rising rigs. He had them on wheels. He had pushing cameramen. He had the guy coming up a staircase being pulled by 12 grips with a hand crank camera. Way ahead of his time, and that's 1929 we're talking about, you know. When we got the Oscar, my then licensee wanted somebody to demo it live as we got the Oscar, right? And I kept saying to this guy, you know, if this guy falls, your whole business would be gone, done. End of story. We're waiting backstage. We see the guy run by through a gap in the scenery, and then there's a crash. Right, and my licensee, Ed DeJulia, went totally white. You know. My hands were on the way to his neck, and the guy appeared again. He hadn't fallen. Some piece of scenery had fallen down. So we all looked a little pale when we went out to accept the statues.
So there's a lot of different ways to mount the camera in addition to moving the camera. This is called a cafe tray or a side cart, or it's basically just a way to connect the camera to the side of a vehicle, for example. In this case, they're using suction pads. You can build a lot of this stuff with pipe you find at a hardware store, but just make sure it's secure so your camera doesn't go flying off. But there's all sorts of different tools you could make. This is another one that using some of that pipe I was talking about, just to connect the camera to shoot through the glass of the windshield. The important thing to note here is they put this black up here so the reflection of the sky doesn't blow away the image, because all you're going to see is reflection. The other thing they probably have on this camera is a polarizer, like your sunglasses, that you can rotate and polarize out any glare on the glass. So if you're ever shooting through glass, remember that. The other thing are tools like, in this case, this is a camera car. So basically, this is called a camera car, and it tows. It has a generator on it. It has all this connection stuff. And in this case, it's towing a low boy, they call it. And the car goes, the front wheels go on that. But you know how most tow trucks look like that when you're towing the car? This is designed so it just looks like it's still riding on the ground. So we could shoot through the windshield and everything like that and light it and such. Other tools, nice big cranes. This is a shot maker, they call it, which is a crane on a truck. And the truck, if you can see the wheels, I don't know if you can see, they crab. So in this truck, you can be driving down the highway and they have it crab over to the other side. Really cool stuff. And then this is a process trailer, they call it. This is probably like Magnum PI or something like that. But it's a way to be able to shoot around a car while you're looking like it's still driving down the road. And of course, if we can all afford it, we would have helicopter shots too.
You just get one of those, the ones with the cameras you can attach.
Yeah, the gyro cameras. Oh yeah, we can do the little ones now, yeah. I'm desperate for one of those for my little...
Plus a lot less sound with that.
Just
Right.
go over to Radio Shack and buy a remote control helicopter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the new way. So let's talk a bit more about advanced moving the camera. One thing I like to point out is how the filmmakers in the past have been so inventive, much more in some ways inventive than we are nowadays, about moving the camera. And this is a scene from Singing in the Rain. And if you notice, once they get into the scene, the camera, it's like they don't cut. They literally blocked out, I think it's 7 or 8 moves. So they're just here, crane up over here, move over to here, actor moves down there, crane back over here. Just take a look at it. It's amazing how much planning they go into the blocking to get it the way that they want it to be. And I love this film too. because I'm kind of a geek that way.
This is the software.
Why, it's just an empty stage.
First glance, yes. But wait a second. A beautiful sunset. Mist from the distant mountains. Colored lights in a garden. The lady is standing on her garden in a rose-colored spot. Flooded with moonlight. We had 5,000 kilowatts of stardust. A soft summer breeze. And you sure look lovely, my Kathy.
Now that you have what you have to say, can you say it?
I'll try. Life was a song. You came
Starting now.
I've laid awake the whole night through. If I but dared to think you care, this is what I'd say to you. You were meant for me, and I was meant for you. Nature that held you when she was done. You were all the sweet things rolled in one. Your plaintive melody that never lets me free. But I'm content. The angels must have sent you, and they meant just for me.
So they just moved that, planned that camera out really carefully. It was really nice. And you notice how with musicals, anything musical, moving the camera like that, not cutting, not using standard cameras, it works so well because it's sort of like the music. The music has a lyrical nature, so does the motion of the camera. You want to move the camera like that if you're shooting music pieces. So we talked about simple little tools too. Here's somebody that's really bad quality, sorry. They built a little, platform with skateboard wheels to do this dolly shot, so you can see. But basically a very simple shot here. So you're just having a dolly, we call it a dolly grip, pulling the dolly. And then it's just an arm with a weight on the back. See, they're just weights like from a gym. And then he's manually controlling. It has a head from a tripod on the front end of it. But let's look at this is what that shot looks like. But look at also what it does, not in terms of mechanically, but how it's a reveal. At first, we're over the shoulder looking at what he's doing. He's very focused. And then we reveal somebody watching. So they're really strong uses for moving the camera like that. I don't know what this is. Oh, another good example. The Godfather. One shot.
I gave freedom up. I thought her name was our attorney. She found a boyfriend and in Italian. She went to the movies with him. She stayed out late. I didn't confess. 2 months ago, he took her for a drive with another boyfriend. They made her drink whiskey. And then they tried to take advantage of her. She resisted. She kept down. So they beat her like an animal. When I went to the hospital, her nose was broken. Her jaw was shut. Held together by wire. She couldn't even weep because of the pain. But I wept. Why did I weep? She was my life. Beautiful girl. Now she will never meet you again. Sorry.
That's really cool. You pull away from his intimate story, showing how alone he is in there, revealing somebody listening, but you don't know who it is, and just by the gesture, you know he's in charge. Just by the simple out-of-focus hand gesturing towards him to get him a drink. Very subtle elements, simple little move, but that's the beauty of cinematography. All right, I don't know what this is. Oh, another great example. You know what, I'm going to skip this one because we get the idea. We talk about some fun shots of zoom. There's that zoom, zoom in, dolly out. There are different names for it. You've probably seen this a million times. They're really hard to do. Basically, what you're doing is you're. This is from.
Vertigo.
Thank you, Vertigo. You're one of the two things. You're either zooming in and dollying out at the same time, so the image the subject stays the same size, but the background changes in perspective because of the depth of the lens. Or you're doing the reverse. This is sped up one. So they start where they're kind of wide, and then they're dollying away and zooming back in and compressing that background back up to the actors so that it feels like they're being oppressed a little bit, more and more pressure. So that's just another cool technique. This is a documentary called Visions of Light. I won't show you the whole thing, just pieces of it. But it's famous cinematographers talking about cinematography, obviously.
One night, I was watching the 1947 version of Oliver Twist, David Lean's Oliver Twist, photographed by Guy Green. Watching the movie, watching the opening scenes of the film, Oliver's mother in labor, walking across this dark war, and my uncle just happened to say, God, cinematography is gorgeous. That's cinematography. That's when I learned what a director of photography was. I found out that I was unconsciously, that I was really responding to light.
In the beginning, all there was a guy with a camera. There were no directors, there was nothing. There was a guy with a camera and shooting subjects. The subject may be 20 seconds long, a train coming at you, whatever it is. Then actors were brought in, and because the cameramen were basically photographers and weren't cast with performers. Usually one of the performers directed the performers. So right in the very beginning, you saw that there was the division of duties. There was the director who took care of the acting part, and there was the cameraman who took care of everything else.
The cinematographer's job is to tell people where to look. Say, look at this. There's the one she's going to weep and she's going to see an aria, or he's going to draw a gun, or, he feels okay, but behind him is an ape, and you better look at the ape. We do some things that we don't even realize we're doing until we see the film put together. And we did a lot of instinct, and we didn't know exactly why. And they work for the picture. And it's very hard to express a reason for it, but it's there.
Great cinematographers are able to understand the stories they're trying to tell and find those elusive visual images that help to tell that story.
A great DP adds to the material that all exists and really works to understand the subject matter and language of the director working with.
I think visually. I think of how if you turned off the soundtrack, anybody could stick around and figure out what was going on. Just every technique visually, the language far more complex than words.
So, We'll look at more clips, well, some clips now, but next week when we talk about lighting, whenever that is, we'll get into this a little bit more. But a couple more little pieces. One about Greg Toland, who shot Citizen Kane, one of my favorite movies of all time, and about his collaboration with Orson Welles. This is a quick clip here.
Had a very good trust for one another because a director has to kind of embrace their duty to let them go. And what Toland did was so amazing from deep space. And the camera blocking. It takes a certain kind of director to want to put up with that demanding on their actors. That's complete choreography of acting to the camera.
By having a deep focus, he was able to give Orson a lot more leeway on how he moved these actors from stage to scene and freed him up. I think that was a tremendous contribution to the communication of the film.
Be careful, Charles. William up around your neck, Charles.
I always had this problem in cinematography, you can carry somebody in the foreground, sharper and focusing somebody 20 feet back. Greg had for a number of years when working on new lenses, faster lenses, that would allow him to pull them right in, stop down, and get greater depth in the scene. That's one of the things I think they did. Citizen Kane, kind of dynamics in it, had extraordinary dynamics compared to other films at the time.
In 1948, he played one of the most popular cinema in Budapest exactly 1 week. The government just pulled it right after that. The real screening was packed. It was heard Citizen Kane's name was screened, which was one of the major events, I think, at that time. And that was the first time I seen Citizen Kane, and I just couldn't believe the magnitude and the magic of filmmaking. And after a while, Citizen Kane was like a textbook for us.
Okay. Yeah, you just look at that framing. If you want to see a movie about good cinematography and a great film, if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, definitely see it. Good film. And then this is another little bit from the same film, talking about it. The thing to notice here is look at the photography. Just look at the framing and how they're positioning things in the frame. It starts off with some conversation of French New Wave, which was loosening up the camera and being more free and introducing more handheld kind of elements. And then it gets into some more, some other stuff that's more rigid. But if you see the way they work with the vanishing lines, and they have a bright spot, so your eye focuses over there and not over there. The juxtaposing sizes, like there's this one shot of, it plays with your perspective, like a lobby of a building, and it looks kind of normal, and then some guy walks by with a giant bust of somebody, and it just throws your perspective. You're like, whoa, what is going on here? Just some amazing uses of cinematography, and filmmaking in general.
I think the films of the French New Wave really influenced me the most. They captured the sense of the life, which was really wonderful, by loosening up the camera and moving it. I mean, they did not think anything about picking up the camera and running with it. It had almost a documentary feel, and so that sort of quality about it would draw you into the film in a way that I think a more static camera would not. Which is not to say it's new, because you go back and you look at Napoleon that Abel Gance made in 1926, and it has every new idea you can conceive of, even today. The steady cam and everything, swinging cameras from ropes and bending dollies and frames and doing all sorts of special effects in the camera. Cinematographers start studying new things and old things to sort of invent a new way.
I think that there was an evolution, and I think if a lot of these guys had been younger, that they would have probably shown us a lot of very interesting stuff. I'll give you a very good example of what you're calling the new style of the 60s. It's Robert Surtees. I mean, he did what's the wedding picture with Dustin Hoffman? The Graduate. Right. I remember reading all these reviews. They're going fresh, innovative, exciting, blah, 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 new, blah, blah. Photographed by a 65-year-old man. Because you have new tools. the kind of person who is a cinematographer is always pushing. You always want to explore. You always want to get yourself into trouble and see how well you can fight your way out of it.
I don't think that each cinematography will be distinct. There's a kind of magnetic selection you do by your. There's a kind of journey that you're doing by yourself. Suddenly you discover that on the same direction you can meet other people. You can meet friends. They can do this journey. And you can meet people that you can be your guide for the portion of the journey. I think Bernardo was one of the most important. Before we start the performance, Bernardo called me. We started to talk about the performance. I mean, what we know about that period? Mainly we know that period, the late 30s, through cinema. So probably we have to use everything is being given to a cinema to that period, and read from our point of view. We look at that point as one of the great minds in American film industry. From Bernardo's point of view was also well, from my point of view was great talent. Each cinematography that did everything before my time. So I'm the sum of all the whole experience. The conformist is almost a compendium of all of the cinema language. It incorporates almost all the design, photographic, editorial techniques that have been developed, and does so in a very coherent and clear way.
So, all those clips, none of them had dialogue in them, and they're like, oh my god, look how visual it is. And it's telling such a story just using how you place the camera, what you show. So telling the story with the camera. And just because I mentioned it last week, I thought I'd show you this clip really quick.
Motion pictures really break away from Hollywood. And you had the influence of the East Coast, you had the influence of foreign markets, and you had directors like Roman Polanski. Roman had a magnificent background. He went to Polish film school, and he had a magnificent background in photography. He understood photography, he understood image, and also with people and emotion. He was tied with emotions.
Oh, Reginald knows how to help nobody ever heard of the best young ladies waiting out.
There's a shot in Rosemary's Baby. His where's the telephone? And Mia says, in the bedroom. And he says, oh, good, and she exits. Roman says, Steve, give me a POV of Ruth. And I got him framed perfectly. Beautifully to see her on the phone talking. I say, okay, Roman, we're ready. He comes over and looks and says, no, move. And I look through and I see just the back of Ruth Gordon seated on the bed. And you can't see her face or see the top. I said, but you can't see her. He says exactly. I said, okay. So now we go to the theater. And 800 people in the theater all go, feel around the door. That's Roman Polanski.
So, see how important just simple framing can be. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's talk about your assignment for next week. Your assignment is to make a film that tells a story using the camera. Using camera angle, camera motion, or not, static, whatever. So things to think about. Think of how to reveal elements using the image. The panning stuff on and off. Having people move in and out of frame, blocking it correctly. Consider handheld. These are just examples. Handheld adds energy, like you saw that running shot from the French New Wave. A smooth dolly shot worked really well for music. Maybe you throw that to the wind and do the opposite. But just know what those elements do from today's class. And then think about the angles. Remember, if you want to look up at somebody, you're going to make them feel really powerful. Looking down makes them feel very small. Different ways to tell that story. So the film cannot be longer than 3 minutes. It can be any length up to 3 minutes. It does not require dialogue, but it has to be a narrative. It cannot be a documentary. It has to be a story. It has to be a story. I'll just leave it at that. So some sort of story. Beginning, middle, and end. Let's put it that way, as best as possible. So tell us a story using camera. And to finish the class, I'm going to show you my first 48-hour film, which is sort of a good example of that, which hopefully tells a story using the camera. So here we go.
pizza. I'm sorry I'm late.
It's okay.
All right. Any questions? Any thoughts? Yes.
So why do you have the big white thing around it the whole time?
Oh, that's just because it's really low res. This is like in the age of nearly, before video. I shot it with a DV camera, so yeah, that's the biggest resolution I had. I couldn't find anything higher, so many years ago. So great. Class again in 2 weeks. If you have any questions, you can always ping me. I'll always be available to help you with your story or whatever you need. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.
I'll probably let you go.
Okay, this is batch number 6. I'm tired of being charged.
See you later.
Thank you very much. Good job. You too. Good job.
Love it. I'm sorry, I know you are not completely satisfied, but when I'm like making faces,